But I don't know. I'm kind of getting over embarrassment in some ways. And I think that's helping me be more real and more true about it because all this stuff is so fleeting. It's all going to go away at some point. It might even burn down in our lifetime at the rate we're doing things. I don't know. It's not looking so hot sometimes.
Most conversations about connection tell you what to think. But are easy answers ever enough? I'm Keith Richardson. With my co host Gerren Taylor, this is More in Common. Honest conversations about what keeps us apart and what doesn't have to. Come think with us.
Welcome back to the More in Common podcast. I'm Gerren Taylor. That's Keith Richardson. That's my announcer voice. I don't always talk like this, but sometimes on production I do. I feel like I should
The
sell
smile
something.
is the killer.
Yeah.
The smile is the killer for those paying attention.
Household product. New from Blammo.
The ShamWow.
Yeah, ooh. Don't give me I would love a slap chop.
A slap chop.
A slap
I used
chop
to have a slap chop.
Did you
I had
really?
a slap chop. Yeah. Yeah. The worst part of the slap chop was cleaning the slap chop.
I can understand that. That's why the George Foreman grill was a formidable TV invention. It was easy to use, performed as promised. The little grease drip tray thing.
I don't know, bro. I never liked cleaning a George Foreman grill.
It wasn't that bad, though. It wasn't that bad. It could have been way worse compared to other contraptions.
But you couldn't like run the whole thing under the sink and just scrub
it. No, clearly not. No, but
right? And like
you let it cool down a little bit, a little wet paper towel.
Yeah.
Done and done.
I don't know.
So we're going to continue
not
our
sponsored
conversation.
by.
Yeah, right. I'm not getting any residuals from those. We're going to continue our conversation, though, that we were having last week about the space between who we are performing, the mask that we put on, even as hosts of this show, versus everyday life. And you were talking last week about kind of why you feel like this happens to you in certain situations. And I want to dig in a little bit about talking about the show itself, because I think that's a very interesting place to be, where you feel like in public you have this, I don't know, I don't want to say deer in headlights moment about it, but like you get in your brain about what the show is, how you talk about it to people. And because we talk so much to people about taking tips away from the show and practicing in real life, what do you do? What are you doing in those moments, or what do you think now that you do in those moments that help you analyze why the gap exists? Why is there this space between who you profess, the things you profess on this show that we should do, and the things that you do?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like, and I think part of it is a big part of how I have learned to navigate the world. This goes back into how I've taken a very individualistic approach. Growing up, I never felt like I had a place I belonged other than in my one-on-one deepest relationships. I had a best friend in high school. I had a best friend in college, and that, Rodney is still my best friend to this day. And those become a real strong safety net for me. And it becomes a protective engine, a way that I can isolate who actually sees me for all of who I am, and then being uncertain of how to fully just be me, not not all permutations, but like when you're in that group space, what do people say about me? People often say, you have your shit together, which can be really intimidating. And there's truth in that, because I think about this stuff all the time, and I'm constantly on this journey of evolution and building and working and doing all of that. But I've also, because I'm an only child and have had to find that, I've learned to do that with a few people and myself. And I don't need to share or express all grievances or really like all the emotional experiences. And I've had some negative outcomes when sharing uh, the negative things in life.
Mm.
And so, where I have learned that I can be most valuable is giving you space,
So you
right?
like
And
the sin eater kind of way of you know what I mean? Like you see your role as taking the pain away from others as opposed to needing to express your own in that sense. At least
And I
in
wouldn't
those
say
situations.
yeah, and I wouldn't say taking it away from others, but helping others navigate through it, right? Helping others navigate through it is probably why I sought to be a therapist when I first went to college and decided not to. It's part of the reason why I have executive coaching and I've developed my executive coaching and I've gone through all the training and that was a late stage career shift or why, I do these things is to help you work through the shit because I've worked through the shit. But my gap is I don't do well talking to you about my shit, even if you give me space for it. And
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
share an example of that here in a second. But I want to get to the answer of your question. And so when I'm talking to people who aren't like, aren't Rodney, aren't my wife, and aren't you, and a couple of other people, I have a hard time because they're going to see a deeper version of me, even if it's still not me entirely, right? Like this conversation, you're seeing the depths of us. And I want to eventually get to the place of why we're doing this, right? Particularly, or in where we're going. But if I get into that, now you're going to see more of me than you already see. And I don't know if you want that. I don't like giving unsolicited advice. I don't like telling you things I don't know or you need. Um, and at the end of the day, I clam up because there is an exposure to it that I'm like, I'm ready for because we're here and it's out on the internet and people can watch it and people can search
Yeah.
for it.
It's
But the
real.
reality is, like, in that interpersonal connection, I have a hard time navigating that in
So
a
what are you
real
protecting?
meaningful way. I don't know. Like, and I think this is the reason this has been a bit profound for me in the prep is because it is part of the difficulties that I experience. Like, I don't know what I'm protecting. I'm protecting myself from perceived judgment in interpersonal communication. Like, I don't like judgment in part because I quietly judge, as we all do. We know it's part of the human experience. And I manage and navigate them so that I'm not externalizing those judgments. I don't know if you have the skills to not externalize your judgments, and I don't want you to judge me
That's
for
fair.
and criticize me and all of that. And I struggle with that. And a good example of this though, and I'll pause after, is like we were just working with a cohort at the 49ers. So we just wrapped up 2026's engagement. And if you've been with us, go back to the check in episode where we do these emotionally grounding exercises. And part of my role as the paid engaged facilitator is to facilitate, not necessarily participate. But we create this space where people are openly sharing emotionally and like really talking about stuff. And I was having a weird day, and one of the participants was like, "Do you need a check in?"
Mm.
And part of me, the consultant in me, was like, "No, this is not my space, right? Like, I want to manage it for you." But that was a cop out, if I'm being really honest, because they were welcoming me into the space. And I was like, I'm not ready to be a part of that. Right. Like, I, And so what I realize in that is that I like to give it to others, but then
Right.
I don't participate in it. And inherently, it keeps me out of finding where I belong because it can create this perception of, oh,
It's like
why
you
aren't you
asked me during
sharing?
the break between episodes, like, you're like, "You look uncomfortable," and I'm like, "I am uncomfortable. I'm genuinely I am very good at being vulnerable at times, and it's even on the show, as a host on the show, sharing a lot personal about myself, about what I'm experiencing as a practitioner of what we're doing and living through it, but it also makes me incredibly uncomfortable. And I think that all of it does, to be honest with you. We were touching last week upon, starting new relationships, and yeah, you are hanging yourself out there sometimes, and you
Yeah.
don't know what how people are gonna take it, or if they're interested in what you're talking about, or if you know what I mean, if you're even resonating at sometimes, and that's cool too. I'm learning more and more. I guess there was a book title. I haven't even read this book, but the title resonated with me. This subtle art of not giving a fuck. I'm not. It's not a plug.
Hmm.
It's not a paid plug, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the
I've
title
heard of the
itself
book.
resonated with me about just the consistency of trying to be who you are, right? Like trying to live up to your own values. And I think part of the reason why I struggle with the gaps that I struggle with is unlearning some of the things that we were talking about, right? Protecting your image socially, protecting yourself from embarrassment, or you know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm kind of getting over embarrassment in some ways. And I think that's helping me be more real and more true about it, because all of this stuff is so fleeting. It's all going to go away at some point. It might even burn down in our lifetime at the rate we're doing things. I don't know. It's not looking so hot sometimes. But I do think that I'm trying to close that gap. I do wake up trying to figure out how to be more authentic, how to do the things that take into practice the things that we do on this show, and slowing down and being more genuinely curious. But I do wonder sometimes if there's an over indexing there, if there's a doing it too much, if there is a value to what you're talking about and keeping that circles closer to chest, or not necessarily being so transparent all the time with values, intentions, love. Like you said, it can be very costly. It's very risky, and that in and of itself carries a lot of emotional weight. If you're not ready to process through, can be extra heavy.
Dude, I mean, talk about summarizing the difficulty and challenge of all of the things that we've ever talked about without getting so I want to go into a theoretical frame, but I also want to prevent myself from over indexing on it because that's what I do, right? Like, oh, let's talk about this at a intellectual level. But, like, bringing back the nature and context of some of the things that we talk about relative to social order in 2026, where we aren't interacting most of the time with people in that tight inner circle because we are at work, and there are certain layers of who you are that don't necessarily, and this is kind of like code switching episode, right? We're not necessarily, we don't need to express in that space because that work team isn't the team that you're going to live with forever for most of the part, right? If you lose the job, that work team is, you might keep in touch with people, say hi from time to time, but they're not part of that inner circle. And I know for me, I desire so much to have that inner circle of just safety, of people who you can walk into a room and they may be judging you, but it's judging you out of love, not judging you out of criticism or a negative state. That you can just be you, but you don't have to. I don't have to be vulnerable all the time. It's just vulnerable being in that space because they accept you for you in your entirety, and I accept them for them in their entirety. And I haven't been good at that most of my life. I've been good at accepting others in their entirety, and but I have not been good at allowing others to accept me, and part of that is because, it's almost like I see the entirety of the world as my inner circle, and so there's such high consequence to not giving a fuck in that regard, and it opens up this conversation around that sentiment, and like, just don't, who cares what other people think? Well, we all do care about what other people think. Eh, but there's also an element of who I want to be. What do I value? And how much do I show you who I am? And I think I've over indexed on really not showing you a lot of who I am.
Right.
And what the challenge is in that is if I give you all this space of vulnerability and you accept it, and I don't reciprocate, that's a it has proven to be a dangerous formula, and it's not intentional. It's not something I've done on purpose. And
Right.
that's something that I have, going back to a lot of this, that I have learned from this show. And that is part of my journey of where I am relative to some of the things that I take away from the show, understanding social dynamics, understanding social networks, understanding vulnerability in a different way. And this episode arc, these conversations are for me a practice in that. It's a practice in sharing more than I've shared in any other conversation up to this point. And I don't even know if I'm sharing enough. Like, if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, you're not saying shit, it's like,
Right.
boy, that's a very different experience than I'm having right now because I am sharing more than I would normally share with a casual person having a conversation, which, from a relationship standpoint, and most people listening, not everybody, most people are having a casual conversation with us, not a intimate conversation with us.
And I think it's for me where I feel like I consistently try to close this gap is in those moments of the people who know how to press your buttons the best. Uh, you know, the close family members, the unprocessed stuff that exists between those folks that makes it really hard sometimes to remind ourselves to do this practice. But I do think sometimes it is genuinely just a lack of, I don't want to say exhaustion, but like, sometimes you just don't have it for people. And it goes back to what you're saying about the social circles or like where they are and how they affect your life, whether it's work or the single serving interactions that you get in society sometimes with people, where you just have to be cognizant about, you know, what all am I giving here to this moment? Because I've been going through this thing recently with a guy who ostensibly I should be trying to work with, to create with. Uh, but he said one thing one time, and now every time he calls me to like try to connect, I go, it's that guy again. And
What did
I,
he say?
well, it was one of those things where he wanted to bring up something racial in a totally non sequitur moment, and it was, I believe he was trying to find like a common ground with me, but that was not necessary, and nobody asked for it. And even somebody, one of our friends who was with me at the time, was like, "Yo, what was that about?" And I was like, "I have no idea why that story was the story we decided to tell right now. Like, who knows?" Um, and so I guess, and again, I could have been curious. I could have been like, "Hey, so what are you trying to say with that story?" Or like, "Where is this going?" Or like, "Who are you?" You know what I mean? Could have been curious about it, but instead I kind of just went, "You know what? I might avoid further interaction with this person. I certainly don't know if I want to be in a room alone with you." But I think that also
I
might
think
be just the pressure of that particular moment in some ways too, right? Like being in public and working around and through all those things because quite frankly as an African American sometimes you run into white people who act like that and it's better just to shut fuck up and move on rather than trying to engage with it or unpack it especially in real time. uh so yeah, sometimes I guess self-preservation or protection also influences the gap, the distance there.
I think the this is such a good story lacking specifics. That's like one of your guards is not to give specifics. Sometimes it's to protect the other parties, and other times it's I don't want to share. And we talk about this frequently, but every social ecosystem has its norms and mores. And the more we integrate cross culturally, the more we integrate, the more we migrate to different places, the more we separate from those social norms that we developed between the ages of 12 and 17 in our common ecosystem, people who we went to high school with, the people we grew up with. And now all of a sudden we're jumping groups into all these spaces and we're trying to navigate what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And none of us really know anymore. There are some things that seem like, yeah, that's obviously unacceptable. But from a social dynamic standpoint, it's hard to add. And so I might feel safe and I might say something. And this is part of like bringing it back to the discomfort of talking about the podcast. It's like, what is acceptable here? And this is the art of balancing on this plane of the subtle art of not giving a fuck, because it is a subtle art of not giving a fuck in a world where social dynamics matter and we really
And you
don't
kind of have
know.
to.
And you have to, right? You have to. But that idea of, I don't care what other people think is a hyper individualistic mentality because it's saying the way I am and the way I go about should be acceptable to all people. And it's not. Right? No one person is not every person is acceptable to me, and I am not acceptable to everybody. And I think part of this emotional journey, I know for me, is recognizing that that is not a judgment on me because some places just don't need me in their space. And I, in turn, don't need them in that space. I think about our show and what we this increase in individualism, this increase in isolation, this increase in loneliness, and this desire for the easiest answer. I think back to when I was in my 20s, how easy I could have fallen into parts of the manosphere. Um, the sentiments, girls don't like nice guys, feeling that sense of rejection, not knowing how to process it and deal with it. Now you have this group of men who say the same things. They might say other things that would probably turn me away from that ecosystem at some point. But if I were 20 now, I would probably gravitate towards some of those spaces because I didn't have the skills. And it's such a simple answer that that anchors on that feeling rather than the nuance of all the complexities in all of this. And what I've come to realize in even preparing for this arc is this desire to have a space for those who represent looking for an answer,
Mm.
going to a place there where there is no simple answer, but that's the community around it. That's the navigation around it. That's the
Well,
space when you turn on our show and you are like, okay, this isn't easy. We know it's not easy, but we keep trying.
I think that's a very interesting point that I can relate to in the sense that this all has been a journey for me, you know? Um, I think it's simple enough to say that I wasn't always like this, right? Like there was a version of Gerren in his early 20s that definitely was not as aware, to say it's mildly, right? Um,
Yeah.
but that is growth. That's the idea. That's the point of this, I think, journey of humanity is that you know better, you do better. And as you grow, your thoughts and values about things change and your perspective shifts and you're able to try to increase what I see as the positive value that the impact that you have on society. But that doesn't mean that those gaps don't still exist in some places or that you don't have blind spots or that you don't need to continue to work on reminding yourself to do those things and be those ways. It does always get easier, I think, as you keep doing it. Uh, but I don't think that it's ever easy to process, especially as you're starting out to do it and reminding yourself to be in those situations. You know, reminding yourself, okay, this is what's happening. How do I handle my reaction, especially to like known triggers, known trigger moments, and reminding yourself to actually do that thing, to take the deep breath, to slow down, to analyze how you decide to respond, especially in conflict, because that's when you get most amped up and your emotions start running wild.
Yeah. And that element of like it's cliche to say it's a journey and you never land and I look back, I'm at 44 and it is even through this podcast, it's a journey of growth each and every day. Some of the new things that I'm reflecting on are forced interactions, forced gatherings, like we talked about recently, and how for so long I've sat back and said, I'm an introvert, I can sit in the corner. I'm feeling really social, I'm gonna go about doing my thing. When there is real opportunity in forced gathering to meet people, to learn new things. I just had a situation recently where we were at a pool party and there were people there I didn't know. And it's like, oh, let me just go strike up a conversation. And boy, I learned some amazing things about this couple and they didn't ask me a lot of questions, but we don't need to be best friends going forward. But I learned some stuff, and I made a new connection that throughout the community we'll see each other, we'll say hi, and I learned about gecko breeding, right? And I didn't even
What
know that was a thing.
Yeah, which you can now take to your Jeopardy tryouts in the future.
That's right. So it is a perpetual journey. It is hard when you're deep in the muck. It's hard in any situation when you have a breakup to think that time heals all wounds. These cliches exist for a reason and they're not always true. And being able to sit with a couple of dudes who are on this journey consistently, sharing their thoughts about how to navigate the journey, what I've come to realize is I'm sharing my thoughts on how I'm navigating this journey just the same as hoping others can get something out of those thoughts to navigate their journey as well.
And we're gonna dig in more because I still have some more questions for you. No, but we do still want to talk more about this subject, about closing the gap, about what it costs to do it, right? Especially as we ask our listeners to do more, to take things away from the show and do them in real life. So we're going to talk about what it costs each of us in order to practice these things more in real life next week. This is the More in Common podcast. I'm Gerren Taylor. That's Keith Richardson. Please do like, share, comment, subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Be sure to share with a friend that you want to have a deeper conversation with as well. And we'll see you next week.